H.P. Lovecraft was an American writer of horror, fantasy, and science fiction, who lived from 1890 to 1937. He had a difficult childhood, as his father was institutionalized for madness when Lovecraft was just 3 years old and his mother was also diagnosed with mental illness. He was raised by his mother, grandparents, and an aunt, who all lived together in a small home in Providence, Rhode Island. Lovecraft's childhood experiences of isolation and fear, along with his lifelong interest in the macabre and the occult, greatly influenced his writing. His stories often feature protagonists who are isolated, either physically or emotionally, and who encounter terrifying, otherworldly beings that threaten to destroy their minds and their lives. Lovecraft's work was largely published in pulp magazines during his lifetime, and he did not achieve widespread fame until after his death. However, his stories have had a significant influence on the horror and science fiction genres, and many of his concepts and themes, such as cosmic horror and the Cthulhu Mythos, have become staples of modern horror literature. Lovecraft's life was also marked by financial struggles. He earned little money from his writing during his lifetime, and he lived in poverty for much of his adult life. He died at the young age of 46, from intestinal cancer. Question: isn't he racist? It is true that H.P. Lovecraft's work is marked by racist and xenophobic themes. Many of his stories feature characters who express hatred and fear of non-white races, and his descriptions of these races are often racist and stereotypical. This is a reflection of the racist attitudes that were prevalent in the early 20th century, when Lovecraft was writing. It is also true that Lovecraft's social awkwardness and isolation during his childhood may have contributed to his xenophobia. He spent much of his youth alone, reading and writing, and had little contact with people outside his immediate family. This isolation may have contributed to his fear and mistrust of those who were different from him. The Cthulhu Mythos, which is a shared universe of stories and characters created by Lovecraft and other writers, also reflects this fear of the unknown and the other. The entities that appear in these stories, such as Cthulhu and the Old Ones, are often described as being monstrous, inhuman, and incomprehensible, and are associated with ancient, non-human civilizations. They are often depicted as being inimical to humanity and as representing a threat to the world as we know it. It is worth noting that Lovecraft's racist views were not unique to him, they were common at his time, but it is important to acknowledge them as a means of understanding his works and the historical context in which they were written. It is also important to note that many contemporary readers and critics have denounced his racist views, and some have called for his works to be viewed through the lens of his time and context, without excusing the racism. H.P. Lovecraft's work has had a significant influence on popular culture, particularly in the genres of horror, fantasy, and science fiction. Many writers, filmmakers, and other artists have been inspired by his stories and have borrowed elements from his Cthulhu Mythos for their own works. For example, his ideas have been adapted into movies such as Re-Animator, The Call of Cthulhu, and In the Mouth of Madness. His stories have also been adapted into video games such as Call of Cthulhu: Dark Corners of the Earth, and Bloodborne. In addition, many writers have been influenced by his cosmic horror and his focus on the unknown, such as horror writers Stephen King and Clive Barker, or science fiction writers such as Arthur C. Clarke and Ian M. Banks. In conclusion, H.P. Lovecraft was an American writer of horror, fantasy, and science fiction, who lived from 1890 to 1937. He had a difficult childhood, as his father was institutionalized for madness when Lovecraft was just 3 years old and his mother was also diagnosed with mental illness. He was raised by his mother, grandparents, and an aunt, who all lived together in a small home in Providence, Rhode Island. His childhood experiences of isolation and fear, along with his lifelong interest in the macabre and the occult, greatly influenced his writing. However, his works are also marked by racist and xenophobic themes, a reflection of the prevalent attitudes of his time. Despite this, his work has had a significant influence on popular culture, particularly in the genres of horror, fantasy, and science fiction, and many contemporary writers and artists have been inspired by his stories.